Long ago, in a small village called Magi, there lived a group of people who were known for their kindness and their love for good food. The village sat near a big river, and the soil was rich. Crops grew well, and the villagers always had enough to eat. In Magi, everyone had a job. Some were farmers who grew yams, cassava, and maize. Others were fishermen who caught fish from the river. There were also hunters who brought back animals from the forest. But the most important job in the village belonged to the cook. The village cook made food for everyone. He cooked for big celebrations and for times when people were sick. His name was Jabari, and he was very old. Jabari had been the cook in Magi for as long as anyone could remember. One day, Jabari called the village chief to his hut. "Chief," he said in a weak voice, "I am very old now. My hands shake when I stir the pot. My eyes cannot see the spices clearly. It is time for me to rest." The chief understood. He was sad because Jabari's food was the best he had ever tasted. But he knew that everyone must rest when they get old. "Thank you for your many years of service," Jabari the chief said. "We will find a new cook for Magi." News spread quickly in the village. Everyone talked about who would be the new cook. Many people wanted the job, but being the village cook was not easy. The new cook had to know all the old recipes. They had to cook for both big and small groups. And most importantly, they had to have a kind heart. The chief decided to hold a cooking contest. Anyone who wanted to be the new village cook could join. They would each cook a meal, and everyone in the village would taste the food. The one whose food was the best would become the new cook. On the day of the contest, 5 people came to compete. There was Nia, a young woman known for her spicy stews. Kwesi brought his famous jollof rice. Akinyi made a big pot of her special ogbono soup. Jelani prepared a plate of grilled fish with a secret sauce. And then there was Chidi. Chidi was new to the village. He had arrived in Magi only a month ago, but he said he was a great cook. No one knew much about him, but they welcomed him to the contest anyway. When it was time to taste the food, the villagers lined up with their bowls. They tried Nia's stew and said it was very good. They tasted Kwesi's jollof rice and smiled with joy. Akinyi's ogbono soup made their mouths water. Jelani's grilled fish was so delicious that people asked for more. Then they came to Chidi's pot. The smell that came from it was amazing. It was like nothing they had ever smelled before. When they tasted Chidi's food, their eyes opened wide. It was the best thing they had ever eaten. "This is better than Jabari's cooking," someone shouted. Others agreed. Even though they loved Jabari, they had to admit that Chidi's food was special. The chief stood up and raised his hands. The village went quiet. "People of Magi," he said in a loud voice, "we have found our new cook. Chidi will now cook for our village." Everyone cheered. They were happy to have such a talented cook. Chidi smiled and bowed. He looked proud, but there was something in his eyes that was hard to read. It was like a shadow passing over them, quick and dark. That night, there was a big celebration. Chidi cooked a feast for everyone. The food was wonderful, and the villagers ate until they could eat no more. They sang songs and danced under the stars. It seemed like the start of a new, happy time for Magi. But no one noticed old Jabari sitting in the corner. He watched Chidi with worried eyes. Jabari had tasted Chidi's food, and while everyone else thought it was delicious, Jabari tasted something else, something hidden. Something that made him afraid. As the moon rose high in the sky, the villagers went to their huts to sleep. They were full and happy. Chidi cleaned up the cooking area and then walked to his own small hut at the edge of the village. He closed the door behind him and lit a candle. In the flickering light, Chidi's face changed. His kind smile disappeared. His eyes grew cold. He reached under his bed and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, strange smells filled the hut. The box was full of powders and herbs that no one in the village had ever seen before. Chidi mixed some of the powders in a cup and drank it down. Then he laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone with a secret, a bad secret. "Fools," he whispered to himself. "They think I'm here to feed them, but soon, very soon, they will learn the truth. And by then it will be too late." The candle flickered, making shadows dance on the walls of the hut. Outside, the village of Magi slept peacefully, unaware of the darkness that had just begun to grow in their midst. Days passed in Magi, and life seemed to go on as usual. The farmers tended their fields, the fishermen cast their nets, and the hunters set their traps in the forest. But small changes began to happen, so small that at first no one really noticed. It started with the children. They became quieter. Where once laughter and shouts had filled the village, now there was often silence. Parents noticed that their little ones didn't want to play as much. They seemed tired all the time. It's nothing, the parents said to each other. Children grow. It makes them sleepy, but old Jabari watched and listened. He saw how the children's eyes had lost their sparkle. He heard their slow, heavy footsteps, and he began to worry even. Meanwhile, Chidi cooked. Every day he prepared meals for the village. His food was always delicious, and people looked forward to eating it. They praised Chidi, telling him how lucky they were to have him. Chidi always smiled and thanked them for their kind words, but when they turned away, his smile faded. In those moments, his eyes were cold and calculating. One evening, as the sun was setting, Jabari walked to Chidi's hut. He knocked on the door, his old hands shaking a little. There was no answer at first, so he knocked again. "Who is it?" Chidi's voice came from inside, sounding irritated. "It is I," Jabari, the old man said. "May I speak with you?" There was a pause, then the sound of things being moved around. Finally, the door opened. Chidi stood there, looking at Jabari with a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "What do you want?" Old man Chidi asked. His voice wasn't friendly. Jabari took a deep breath. "I want to talk about your cooking," he said. Chidi's eyes narrowed. "What about my cooking? There is something not right about it," Jabari said slowly. "I taste things in it. Things that should not be there." For a moment, Chidi said nothing. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. It was sharp, like the edge of a knife. "You're getting senile, old man. Everyone loves my food. Go home and rest your tired mind." He started to close the door, but Jabari put his foot in the way. "I know you are doing something to the food," the old cook said, his voice stronger now. "And I will find out what it is." Chidi leaned in close. All pretense of kindness was gone from his face. "Be careful, Jabari. Accidents happen to nosy old men. Terrible accidents." Then he shoved Jabari back and slammed the door shut. Jabari stood there for a long moment, his heart beating fast. He knew now, without a doubt, that Chidi was evil. But how could he prove it? Who would believe him? The next day, Chidi announced that he would make a special treat for the children of the village. "They seem so tired lately," he said, his voice full of fake concern. "I will bake them sweet cakes to give them energy." The parents were grateful. They didn't suspect anything wrong. But Jabari knew better. He watched as Chidi prepared the cakes, mixing flour and sugar. But when no one was looking, Chidi added something else, a pinch of powder from a small pouch he kept hidden in his clothes. Jabari saw this and his blood ran cold. He had to do something, but what? That afternoon, when Chidi called the children to come and eat the cakes, Jabari was there. Before anyone could take a bite, he stepped forward. "Wait," he cried. "These cakes are not safe." Everyone turned to stare at him. Chidi's face darkened with anger. "What are you talking about, you old fool?" he snapped. Jabari pointed a shaking finger at Chidi. "I saw him put something in the cakes, something that is not food. Do not let the children eat them." There was a murmur of confusion among the villagers. They looked from Jabari to Chidi, unsure what to believe. Chidi forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. Jabari is just jealous because I'm a better cook than he ever was. Here, I'll prove the cakes are safe." And with that, he picked up one of the cakes and took a big bite. Nothing happened. Chidi smiled triumphantly. "See? Perfectly fine." The villagers began to relax. Some of them glared at Jabari, thinking he had caused trouble for no reason. But Jabari wouldn't give up. No, he insisted. He only pretended to eat it. I'm sure but his words were cut off as he suddenly clutched at his chest. Pain shot through him like fire. He couldn't breathe. The world spun around him, and then everything went black. When Jabari woke up, he was lying on a mat in his own hut. His whole body ached, and his mouth was dry. He tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pushed him back down. "Rest, my friend," said a familiar voice. It was the village chief. Jabari blinked, trying to clear his vision. What happened?" he asked weakly. The chief sighed. "You collapsed in the village square. The healer says it was your heart. You gave us quite a scare." Memories came flooding back to Jabari: the cakes, Chidi, his accusation, the children. He gasped. "Did they eat the cakes?" "No," the chief said. "After you fell ill, everyone was too upset. Chidi threw the cakes away. He said he would make fresh ones another day." Jabari closed his eyes in relief. At least the children were safe for now. But he knew the danger was far from over. "Chief," he said, gathering his strength, "I must tell you something. It's about Chidi. He is not who he seems." And so, in his weak voice, Jabari told the chief everything. He spoke of his suspicions, of the strange things he had seen, and of his confrontation with Chidi the night before. The chief listened in silence. When Jabari was done, he sat for a long time without speaking. "Finally," he said, "these are serious accusations, my old friend, but you have no proof. And Chidi has done nothing but good for our village since he arrived." But Jabari started to protest. The chief held up a hand. "I know you believe what you're saying. But think about it. If Chidi wanted to harm us, why would he have eaten the cake himself? No, I think your illness has confused you. You need to rest and get well." Jabari wanted to argue, but he was too tired. The chief's words made sense, even though Jabari knew in his heart they were wrong. But what could he do? No one would believe him without evidence. As the chief left the hut, Jabari lay back on his mat. Tears of frustration ran down his wrinkled cheeks. He had failed to convince the chief. Now, who would protect the village from the evil that lurked in their midst? Meanwhile, in his own hut, Chidi paced back and forth. His plans had almost been ruined by that meddling old man. He would have to be more careful now, and he would have to deal with Jabari once and for all. He walked over to a corner of the hut and lifted a loose floorboard. Underneath was a deep hole, and in that hole was a large clay jar. Chidi carefully removed the lid. The smell that came out of the jar was foul, like rotting meat mixed with bitter herbs. Chidi didn't seem to mind. He reached in and pulled out a handful of dark, slimy stuff. Soon, he whispered to himself, "Soon you will be ready. And then, no one will be able to stop me. Not even old Jabari." He laughed, and the sound echoed in the empty hut like the cackle of a hyena. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the village of Magi. A cool breeze blew in from the river, carrying the scent of approaching rain. But beneath the ordinary smells of the village smoke from cooking fires, damp earth, blooming flowers, there was another odor. It was faint, barely noticeable. It was the smell of decay, of something rotten, or of evil. And it was growing stronger every day. Weeks passed, and life in Magi settled into a new rhythm. The villagers grew accustomed to their quiet children, their own increasing fatigue. They didn't question why they felt so tired all the time. They just accepted it as a fact of life. Chidi's popularity continued to grow. His meals were the highlight of everyone's day. People said that his food made them feel better, gave them strength. What they didn't realize was that it was Chidi's food that was making them weak in the first place. The relief they felt was just a temporary lifting of the poisons he fed them. Jabari, meanwhile, grew stronger. His body recovered from his mysterious illness, but his mind never rested. He watched. He listened. And he waited for a chance to expose Chidi's true nature. One night, unable to sleep, Jabari decided to take a walk. The moon was full, casting a silvery light over the sleeping village. As he passed near Chidi's hut, he heard voices. Curious, he crept closer. "The mixture is almost ready," Chidi was saying. His voice sounded different, deeper, more guttural. "Just a few more days good," replied another voice. It was unlike anything Jabari had ever heard before. It was like the hiss of a snake mixed with the growl of a lion. "I grow impatient. I hunger, I know," Master Chidi said. "But we must be careful. That old fool Jabari suspects something. If we move too quickly, he might. I care nothing for your petty problems." The strange voice roared. The walls of the hut seemed to shake. "I have waited centuries for this moment. Bring me what I need, or suffer the consequences." There was a sound like thunder, and then silence. Jabari stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he just heard? Who or what was Chidi talking to? Suddenly, the door of the hut flew open. Jabari ducked behind a bush just in time. Chidi stormed out, his face twisted with rage and... was that fear? He looked around, his eyes glinting in the moonlight, then went back inside and slammed the door. Jabari waited until he was sure it was safe, then hurried back to his own hut. His mind was reeling. He had been right all along. Chidi was not just evil, he was in league with some kind of dark power. But what were they planning? And how could he stop them? The next day, Jabari went to see the chief again. This time, he brought a proposal. "Let me cook one meal for the village," he said. "Just one. To remind everyone of the old days." The chief looked dubious. "I don't know, Jabari. You're not as young as you used to be. And Chidi might be offended." "Please," Jabari insisted. "It would mean so much to me. And I'm sure Chidi won't mind taking one day off from his duties." Finally, the chief agreed. When Chidi heard about it, he shrugged. "Let the old man have his fun," he said with a smirk. "It will change nothing," so it was decided. In 3 days' time, Jabari would cook for Maji once more. Those 3 days were busy ones for both Jabari and Chidi. Jabari gathered ingredients, choosing each herb and spice with care. He wanted this meal to be special, not just delicious, but healing. Chidi, too, was preparing something. Every night, he would go into the forest carrying his big clay jar. He would return hours later, the jar now covered with a cloth. Whatever was inside moved and squelched, as if alive. On the morning of the 3rd day, both men rose before dawn to begin cooking. Jabari lit his fire and started to prepare his stew, singing softly as he worked. His old hands moved slowly but surely, adding just the right amount of each ingredient. Across the village, Chidi was also cooking. But he added things to his pots that no normal cook would use. Powders that fizzed and smoked, liquids that glowed with an eerie light, and finally, the contents of the clay jar, a mass of writhing, pulsating flesh that he cut up and mixed into the food. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, delicious smells began to fill the village. People sniffed the air appreciatively, their mouths watering. They were eager to taste both Chidi's meal and Jabari's stew. At midday, everyone gathered in the village square. 2 large pots sat side by side, one old and dented, the other shiny and new. Jabari and Chidi stood behind them, ladles in hand. "Friends," said the chief, "today we are blessed with a bounty of good food. Let us enjoy both the old and the new." Everyone will taste from both pots." The villagers cheered and lined up. One by one, they held out their bowls. Chidi filled one side with his concoction, while Jabari poured his stew into the other. Jabari watched anxiously as people began to eat. At first, they all went for Chidi's food. It smelled irresistible. But as soon as they tasted Jabari's stew, something changed in their faces. Color returned to their cheeks. Their eyes brightened. It was as if a fog was lifting from their minds. This is wonderful," exclaimed one woman. "I feel so much better." Others nodded in agreement. They turned to Jabari's pot for seconds, leaving Chidi's food untouched. Chidi's face darkened with fury. This was not how it was supposed to go. He opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to cast some spell, but at that moment, a low rumble shook the ground. Everyone froze. The rumble grew louder, turning into a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Chidi, the voice from the night before, but now magnified 100-fold. "You have failed Maine." The sky turned black as ink. Wind howled through the trees. And there, in the center of the village, the earth split open like a rotten fruit. From the chasm rose a creature out of nightmare, huge, misshapen, its body a mass of twisted limbs and gaping maws. Eyes glowed like hot coals all over its hideous form. The villagers screamed and ran. Only Jabari stood his ground, though his legs shook with terror. The monster ignored everyone else. Its burning gaze was fixed on Chidi. Master," Chidi stammered, falling to his knees. "Please." "I can explain." "Silence," roared the creature. "I have no more use for you, worthless servant." A massive tentacle lashed out, wrapping around Chidi's body. The evil cook screamed once, and then he was gone, swallowed whole by one of the monster's many mouths. Now those fiery eyes turned toward the rest of the village. At last the abomination rumbled, "I am free. And now I shall feast." It began to move forward, crushing huts beneath its bulk. People fled in all directions, but there seemed no escape from its writhing limbs. In that moment of horror, an odd calm came over Jabari. He knew what he had to do. Slowly, steadily, he picked up his pot of stew and walked toward the monster. "You," he called out, his old voice ringing clear above the chaos. "Yes, you? I have something for you impossibly." The creature paused. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps Jabari's bravery gave it pause. Whatever the reason, it turned its attention to the old cook. "Are you not hungry?" Jabari asked. He held up the pot. Steam rose from it, carrying an aroma of herbs and spices. "I have made this just for you." A laugh like an avalanche shook the air. "You think to feed me, little morsel? I could devour you and your entire village without a thought." "Of course you could," agreed Jabari. "We would be nothing but a small snack to one as great as you. But would it not be pleasant to taste something prepared specially in your honor before you begin your true feast?" The monster seemed to consider this. Then, moving with surprising grace for something so large, it extended one. The monster lowered its massive head towards Jabari, its hot breath washing over the old man. Jabari stood his ground, holding up the pot of stew. With a swift motion, the creature opened one of its larger mouths and engulfed both the pot and its contents in a single gulp. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the monster let out a tremendous roar that shook the very foundations of the earth. It thrashed about, its many limbs flailing wildly. Steam began to pour from its countless mouths and eyes. "What have you done?" it bellowed, its voice filled with pain and rage. Jabari watched calmly. "I have fed you truth," he said. "I have given you purity. And those things, great beast, are poison to a creature like you." The monster howled, a sound of agony and despair. Its body began to shrink, melting like wax under a hot sun. The darkness that had covered the sky started to dissipate, allowing rays of sunlight to pierce through. As the villagers watched in awe, the abomination that had threatened to devour them all dwindled down to nothing more than a puddle of foul-smelling slime. And then, with a final hiss, even that evaporated under the warm African sun, a profound silence fell over Magi. Then, as if waking from a long dream, the people began to stir. Children's laughter rang out, bright and clear. The air felt fresher, the colours more vivid. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from everyone's hearts. The chief was the first to approach Jabari. He fell to his knees before the old cook. "Forgive us," he said, tears in his eyes. "We did not listen to you. We did not see the evil among us until it was almost too late." Jabari helped the chief to his feet. "There is nothing to forgive," he said gently. "Evil often comes disguised as something good. But remember this day, my friends. Remember that true nourishment comes not just from what fills the belly, but from what fills the heart and soul as well." In the days that followed, life in Magi gradually returned to normal. The villagers rebuilt what had been destroyed. They cleared away all traces of Chidi's hut, burying the strange implements and ingredients they found there deep in the earth. Jabari resumed his role as the village cook, but now he had apprentices, young people eager to learn not just his recipes, but his wisdom. He taught them that cooking was more than just mixing ingredients, it was an act of love, a way of caring for others. And so, as the seasons passed, the village of Magi flourished. The evil that had once threatened them became nothing more than a cautionary tale told around evening fires. But they never forgot the lesson they had learned, that vigilance is the price of peace, and that even the humblest among us can possess great courage and power. As for Jabari, he lived to a ripe old age, beloved by all. And it was said that the meals he cooked in those later years were the best of all, simple in their ingredients, but rich in the one element no evil could ever overcome: love.